The Bronze Era of bodybuilding spans roughly from the late 19th century to the early 1930s. This period laid the foundation for the sport, emerging from the broader physical culture movement that emphasized health, strength, and overall physical development rather than pure competition. Bodybuilding was not yet a formal sport, but an exhibition art, often combined with feats of strength. One of the most influential figures of this era was Eugen Sandow, widely regarded as the father of modern bodybuilding. Sandow's stage performances showcased his muscular development alongside gymnastic and strongman feats, making the human physique a form of entertainment and art. He helped establish the ideals of symmetry, proportion, and definition that would guide bodybuilding standards for decades. In 1901, Sandow organized the Great Competition in London, often considered the first major bodybuilding contest. Training during the Bronze Era was basic by today's standards. Athletes relied on calisthenics, gymnastics, and rudimentary weightlifting equipment like globe barbells, dumbbells, and pulley machines. Workouts focused on full body development in a single session, performed several times per week. Nutrition knowledge was minimal, and diet recommendations were based more on general health than muscle hypertrophy. Photographs and lithographs from this time show physiques with moderate muscle size, excellent symmetry, and minimal body fat, but without the extreme muscularity of later eras. The emphasis was on a balanced, functional, and aesthetically pleasing look, achievable without modern supplementation. Culturally, the Bronze Era positioned bodybuilding as a respectable pursuit tied to discipline and health, appealing to middle and upper-class audiences. Physical culture magazines, postcards, and live performances helped spread its popularity worldwide, especially in Europe and North America. This period firmly established the idea of the muscular body as a symbol of vitality, inspiring the evolution of the sport. The Silver Era of bodybuilding is generally considered to span the mid-1930s to the mid-1940s, marking a shift from the showmanship-driven roots of the Bronze Era toward more structured physique competition and systematic training methods. This period coincided with the growth of organized bodybuilding events, the establishment of judging criteria, and an increasing focus on muscle proportion, balance, and posing artistry. A defining figure of the Silver Era was John Grimek, often called the monarch of muscledom. Grimek's physique combined impressive size with symmetry, and his dominance in competitions, including winning the 1939 and 1940 Mr. America titles, set new performance and aesthetic standards. His training was ahead of its time, incorporating progressive overload and heavier compound lifts, which pushed muscle development beyond the norms of earlier decades. The Silver Era also saw the influence of Steve Reeves beginning to emerge in the late stages, though his prime would come in the Golden Era. Reeves represented the ideal of an aesthetically balanced, classically inspired physique, bridging the transition to the next stage of bodybuilding's evolution. Training in this era became more methodical. Lifters began dividing workouts into body part-focused routines instead of always doing full-body sessions. Equipment improved, with more accessible plate-loading barbells, adjustable dumbbells, and specialized benches. Gyms became more common in urban areas, allowing more athletes to train regularly. Nutrition understanding advanced slightly, with increased awareness of protein's role in muscle development, though supplementation was still rudimentary, mostly milk, eggs, and whole foods. Competitively, bodybuilding gained recognition through events like the AAU Mr. America contest, which standardized judging based on muscularity, symmetry, and presentation. This period also refined posing techniques, with greater emphasis on fluid transitions and aesthetically pleasing stances. The Silver Era solidified bodybuilding as a legitimate competitive pursuit rather than a novelty act, laying the groundwork for the explosion of the sport in the post-war Golden Era. The Golden Era of bodybuilding, spanning the mid-1940s to the late 1950s, is often regarded as the period when the sport reached a peak in aesthetic ideals, balance, and mass appeal. This era was defined by the pursuit of proportionate, symmetrical physiques with moderate muscle size, tight waists, broad shoulders, and an overall look reminiscent of classical Greek and Roman statues. The dominant figure of the Golden Era was Steve Reeves, whose physique became the gold standard for aesthetics. Reeves's wide shoulders, small waist, and harmonious proportions inspired generations of bodybuilders, and even influenced Hollywood's portrayal of strength in films like Hercules. Reeves won the 1950 Mr. Universe and became a cultural icon, bridging the gap between competitive bodybuilding and mainstream entertainment. Other notable athletes included Reg Park, who brought a more muscular, powerful look while still maintaining symmetry, and Clancy Ross, who won multiple Mr. America and Mr. Universe titles. Reg Park's approach foreshadowed the heavier, mass-focused training that would dominate later eras. Training during the Golden Era focused on a blend of strength and hypertrophy, often using full-body routines 3 times per week. Compound lifts like the bench press, squat, and deadlift were staples, but isolation exercises and posing practice became more integrated into programs. Volume was moderate by modern standards, but intensity and consistency were high. Nutrition philosophy emphasized whole, nutrient-dense foods: meats, dairy, eggs, vegetables, and fruits. Protein-rich diets were common, though supplementation was limited mainly to basic protein powders and desiccated liver tablets. The Golden Era's competitive scene expanded with international events like the NABBA Mr. Universe, attracting athletes worldwide. Posing was refined into an art form, with flowing transitions and attention to presentation. This era is remembered as bodybuilding's most visually appealing phase, balancing size, symmetry, and aesthetics, before the sport's shift toward sheer muscle mass in the following decades. The transitional era of bodybuilding, spanning roughly the early 1960s to the early 1970s, marked a significant shift from the aesthetic dominance of the Golden Era toward the larger, more muscular physiques that would define later decades. This period acted as a bridge, combining the classical proportions of the past with a steadily increasing emphasis on size, density, and conditioning. One of the most pivotal developments during this era was the founding and rapid growth of the International Federation of Bodybuilding, IFBB, by Joe and Ben Weider. The IFBB began promoting high-profile contests such as Mr. Olympia, first held in 1965, giving elite competitors a platform beyond Mr. Universe titles and creating a professional path in the sport. Larry Scott, the inaugural Mr. Olympia in 1965 and 1966, embodied the transitional era's look: thick, full muscle bellies paired with balanced proportions. Athletes like Sergio Oliva, known as The Myth, pushed size standards further, with incredible mass combined with a small waist and striking shape. Oliva's dominance from 1967 to 1969 signaled the sport's increasing shift toward bigger physiques without entirely sacrificing symmetry. Training styles evolved to higher volume and split routines, with bodybuilders often training 5 to 6 days per week and targeting fewer muscle groups per session. This allowed for greater specialization and intensity on specific areas, fueling more muscle growth. Supersets, giant sets, and other intensity techniques became common. Nutritionally, protein intake recommendations became more standardized, with growing use of protein powders and supplements marketed by companies like Weider. Steroid use, though less publicized, began to influence physique development during this era, allowing for greater gains in muscle size and recovery. The transitional era was critical in setting the stage for the mass monsters era. It kept the visual appeal of the Golden Era alive, but unmistakably steered bodybuilding toward a future defined by unprecedented muscle mass and stage dominance. The mass monsters era, generally recognized from the late 1970s through the 1990s, marked bodybuilding's decisive turn toward extreme muscular size, density, and conditioning. While symmetry and aesthetics remained important, the competitive advantage shifted heavily toward athletes who could combine massive proportions with detailed muscular definition. This period produced some of the most physically imposing champions in the sport's history. The early phase was influenced by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who dominated the 1970s with his combination of size, shape, and charisma. However, by the 1980s, bodybuilders like Lee Haney elevated overall muscle mass to new levels while maintaining symmetry, winning 8 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles, 1984 to 1991. Haney's blend of mass and proportion was a transitional benchmark within the era. The mid to late 1990s saw the arrival of Dorian Yates, whose unprecedented size, density, and conditioning redefined the standard for winning physiques. Yates introduced a grainy, ultra-conditioned look, popularizing high-intensity training methods with lower volume but extreme effort on each set. His dominance from 1992 to 1997 pushed competitors to chase heavier physiques, leading to the rise of even more massive athletes. Ronnie Coleman then took the concept of mass to its ultimate extreme, combining enormous muscle size with shredded conditioning to win 8 consecutive Olympia titles, 1998 to 2005. Coleman's physique represented the peak of the mass monster philosophy, over 280 pounds on stage with deep separation and vascularity. Training during this era often revolved around heavy compound lifts like squats, deadlifts, and bench presses, combined with high-volume accessory work to bring up specific muscle groups. Nutrition and supplementation became far more advanced, with precise macronutrient tracking, year-round bulking and cutting cycles, and expanded use of performance-enhancing drugs. The Mass Monsters era redefined bodybuilding's competitive criteria. While it inspired awe among fans, it also sparked debates about whether the pursuit of sheer size came at the cost of the classical aesthetics that once defined the sport. The post-mass era, spanning the mid-2000s to the early 2010s, emerged as a response to the extreme size standards set during the Mass Monsters era. While competitors still displayed impressive muscle mass, there was a noticeable effort, both by athletes and judges, to reintroduce elements of symmetry, proportion, and overall health into the sport's ideal physique. This period aimed to balance the massive development of the previous decades with aesthetics that appealed to a broader audience. One key figure in defining this era was Jay Cutler, who won 4 Mr. Olympia titles, 2006, 2007, 2009, 2010. Cutler combined sheer size with a more refined presentation and balanced proportions. Dexter Jackson, the 2008 Mr. Olympia, further reinforced this shift, winning with a physique that emphasized shape, symmetry, and conditioning rather than overwhelming mass. This was also the era when the men's physique division debuted, 2012, signaling the sport's recognition that not all audiences or athletes were drawn to the extreme bodybuilding standard. The addition of new divisions allowed for more attainable and aesthetically driven physiques to share the stage alongside traditional open-class bodybuilding. Training in the post-mass era continued to use the heavy, progressive resistance principles of the previous generation, but with more attention to joint health, injury prevention, and muscle balance. Competitors increasingly focused on refining weak points, improving posing skills, and maintaining conditioning throughout the year. Nutrition strategies became more advanced, aided by better understanding of nutrient timing, supplementation science, and recovery methods. Off-seasons tended to be cleaner, avoiding excessive fat gain to make contest preparation more efficient and less stressful on the body. While mass was still rewarded, the post-mass era marked a clear turning point in bodybuilding's evolution. It acknowledged that the extreme standards of the 1990s and early 2000s had reached their physical and aesthetic limits, opening the door for a renewed focus on proportion and presentation in the years ahead. The Classic Physique revival began in the mid-2000s and continues to influence the sport today. It was driven by growing demand from both fans and athletes for a return to the aesthetic ideals of bodybuilding's golden era, where symmetry, proportion, and balance were valued equally with muscle size. The IFBB Pro League officially launched the Classic Physique division in 2016, creating a competitive category that rewarded classic lines, smaller waists, and flowing muscle shapes rather than sheer mass. This movement was fueled by a noticeable fatigue among audiences toward the extreme size and sometimes blocky midsections seen in open bodybuilding. Classic physique competitors are judged not only on muscular development and conditioning, but also on posing artistry and the ability to display a timeless, statuesque look, reminiscent of athletes like Steve Reeves, Frank Zane, and Serge Nubret. One of the most recognizable faces of the Classic Physique revival is Chris Bumstead, who has dominated the division with multiple Olympia titles since 2019. Bumstead's wide shoulders, narrow waist, and flawless proportions have become the modern benchmark, inspiring a new generation to pursue a more balanced and attainable style of bodybuilding. Training approaches in this era blend old-school volume and posing practice with modern hypertrophy science. Athletes still use heavy compound lifts, but place equal emphasis on sculpting muscles for symmetry and flow. Posing routines have regained importance, with competitors often choreographing performances to music that highlight their physique's strengths. Nutrition and supplementation follow advanced modern practices, but with an emphasis on maintaining leaner physiques year-round. Many classic physique athletes aim for longevity in the sport, focusing on health markers, joint preservation, and sustainable growth. The classic physique revival has not only reshaped competition standards, but also shifted mainstream fitness culture, making the classic look a highly sought-after goal both on and off the stage. The modern era of bodybuilding, spanning the late 2010s to the present day, represents a highly diversified landscape where multiple divisions, open bodybuilding, classic physique, men's physique, women's bodybuilding, figure, fitness, bikini, and wellness coexist and thrive. Rather than a single dominant ideal, the sport now celebrates a range of physiques, each with its own judging criteria and fan base. In the open bodybuilding category, mass, density, and extreme conditioning remain the winning formula. Champions like Big Ramy, Mr. Olympia 2020, 2021, and Hadi Choopan 2022 showcase massive physiques while attempting to maintain proportion and presentation. However, the gap between open bodybuilding and classic physique aesthetics is now more distinct than ever, giving audiences clear alternatives in physique ideals. The classic physique division, propelled by stars like Chris Bumstead, has brought a massive resurgence in popularity to the sport, attracting younger fans and athletes who appreciate a more attainable, balanced look. Men's physique, with its focus on a lean, beach-ready build, continues to appeal to a mainstream audience and has one of the largest pools of competitors. Training in the modern era is a sophisticated blend of heavy resistance work, periodized programming, and recovery science. Athletes use data tracking, wearable technology, and advanced recovery modalities like cryotherapy, red light therapy, and blood flow restriction training. Injury prevention and longevity have become priorities for many, especially as careers now often span decades. Nutrition science is at its peak, with competitors using precise macronutrient tracking, supplementation tailored to blood work, and evidence-based strategies for peak week conditioning. Social media has transformed bodybuilding's reach, allowing athletes to build personal brands, secure sponsorships, and connect directly with fans year-round. The modern era is not defined by a single aesthetic standard, but by its diversity, technology-driven training, and global accessibility. It reflects bodybuilding's evolution into both a competitive sport and a worldwide fitness culture.